Good morning. That may work in Minnesota, but that doesn't work here in Michigan. Good morning. So proud to welcome you down here to the city of Detroit. We have an absolutely incredible day, and we're starting in incredible fashion. We are grateful to be hosted here at the Michigan Central Station in what is truly a remarkable facility and truly, I believe, a remarkable time spent together talking about what this building was and maybe even more so what this building will be. I had the opportunity, as you can see in this video, to spend some time with the Ford team driving in riding in an autonomous vehicle around town with some of Ford's leadership, and I can tell you it was an absolutely incredible experience. I think mayors understand the excitement of what autonomous vehicles will bring to our communities, what it will mean to our certain populations, senior populations, our disabled populations, and know what it will mean as one of the great equalizers, probably one of the great disruptors of this next century will be advances in mobility. But before we get to that and before we get to some of the discussions today, I just want to stop and pause and look up, if you would, for just a moment and think, as I'm so proud, as you know, I've mentioned this before, so thrilled to have the Conference of Mayors here in Southeast Michigan. And as you think about what happened perhaps in 1932 when mayors from around the country arrived here in this station with a desire to have a more collaborative voice, to work together to represent America's cities. And they arrived here in the city of Detroit, had a meeting, and from that meeting started the United States Conference of Mayors. Its birthplace here in the city of Detroit, with probably many of our forefathers arriving through these doors on trains that stopped here. Pretty poignant that we be back here today. I'm so grateful for this next gentleman who has been an absolute partner in planning this event, a tremendous, not just leader for the city of Detroit, but regional leader. We all support him and all he's doing here in the city of Detroit. Ladies and gentlemen, my friend and our host for today, Mayor Mike Duggan.
Well, welcome to Detroit. This building has been an obsession of mine. It closed in 1981. The windows were gone, the building was deteriorated. At one point, the security company that was keeping it didn't have their bills paid, filed a lien, and were awarded the building. The security company ended up owning this train station, ultimately bought by the Maroon family that owns the Ambassador Bridge. But every international story about ruin porn in Detroit featured this building as the symbol of Detroit's decline. And so the Maroon family needed a whole bunch of things from me, and I said, I want one thing from you. I want you to put windows in the train station. And they said it's going to cost us $1 million to put windows in the train station. I said, guys, there's no deals until you do that. So over their very angry disagreement, they put windows in the train station. And the town said, oh my God, it looks great. And then Cranes hosted a dinner for 500 people in here, candlelit, and people came through and saw the beauty, and people started to see what this could be. And I said at the time, somebody is going to make this an iconic corporate facility. And then you have, at Ford Motor Company, truly visionary leadership with Bill Ford and Jim Hackett, who believe the future of the auto industry is in mobility and how you're going to move people. And they have this idea to create, you're going to hear from these folks now, so I won't take too much away, but you're going to, the designing, every year that goes by, more and more of a car is a computer. And either Silicon Valley or Detroit were going to be the future of the auto industry. But the folks in Silicon Valley, these kids sit in these long tables all gathered in groups. They don't sit in the kind of structured manufacturing headquarters you're used to. And Bill Ford and Jim Hackett said, we're going to create a whole new environment for designing the future of automated vehicles and electric vehicles. We got to get it out of a traditional. They could have gone to Silicon Valley. They could have gone to Ann Arbor. And I went and pitched them hard that when these young people graduate from school where they want to live, the talent you're looking for is here. And part of it was Bill Ford has an emotional attachment to this neighborhood. And his daughter Alexandra, who's with the company, is here today. She'll understand this, but this was called Corktown. It's where the Irish immigrants came. My family lived here. At the same time, the Ford family lived here. My great-grandfather, Michael Kelly, ran a blacksmith shop just up the street on Michigan Avenue where he shoed horses. And the family lore is that Henry Ford was so impressed with his craftsmanship, he hired him into the Model T plant. And as I say to Bill, his ancestors were into cars, mine were into horseshoes, which tells you about the relative direction of the two families. But all these years later, Bill saw an opportunity to invent the future of the auto industry in the neighborhood of his roots. And so he is in California today getting an award. He really wanted to be here himself, but his entire management team is here. And you're going to get a chance to hear from them, not just about this building, but where they see the future of the auto industry going and how it might help each of you think about how it affects the future of your company. So with that, I want to introduce his right hand, Bill Ford's Chief of Staff, Mary Culler. Mary, please come up.
Thank you, Mayor Duggan. Wow, there's no better partner than Mayor Duggan. We're so fortunate to have him leading the city, because if you can just imagine how much has happened in the last few years under his leadership, it's really incredible, and it's very exciting for all of us. I'd also like to thank Mayor Barnett, who I was just talking to somebody saying the mayor from Rochester Hills has brought all of you here today, which is incredible, and so we appreciate his leadership. And then we also have a few people who represent our plant state, so I appreciate them as well so much. We have Mayor Fisher, maybe Mayor Fisher can wave, from Louisville. We have Mayor Berger from Lima, Ohio, so that would be terrific. And then Mayor Taylor, who is from Sterling Heights, so we appreciate that. So welcome. I'm sorry that I can't get the heat on for you, so I apologize if it's feeling a little bit chilly, but maybe you guys can snuggle together while we go through kind of a lot of information today. And if some of you have to get up and kind of move around to get the blood flowing, please feel free to do that. But as Mayor Duggan has said, I used to work for Mayor Daley, so I had his name in my head. But we've done some amazing things in the last year. When we first announced this, Bill Ford, as Mayor Duggan said, this was really his vision. And what he really loved about this building was the symbolism of what it meant. Not only what it meant for Detroit, but what it meant for transportation. He really imagined that this could be the future of mobility. The symbolism of it once being a train station where there was so much access for people to come and create a new life was really his thought about what it could be in the future. And so a year ago, we announced that we were purchasing this station. And what I'd like to do is to just play a clip.
Detroit is the historic hub for automakers, but that industry is getting 21st century competition from Silicon Valley. The Ford Motor Company is stepping up efforts to compete. It will reveal plans this morning to transform a 105-year-old train station into its high-tech base for the future of automotive mobility.
For decades, Michigan Central Station was the place where you knew you'd arrived. But once the last train pulled out, it became a place where hope left. It's time for that to change.
Ford is announcing that it is going to do more. This is a long-abandoned, iconic train station in the heart of Detroit that has become this icon of ruin, and you're not okay with that.
I hated that. I remember the train station when it was vibrant and it was an awesome place.
We want this station, a place that many people suggested should be torn down, to be a beacon of development, opportunity, and possibility all over again.
I heard somebody say, don't call it the train station, call it the brain station. That Bill Ford Jr. is planning to give Silicon Valley a run for its money in terms of recruiting really smart people to come here.
We are.
Today, the Michigan Central Station has a new owner, Ford Motor Company. It's time to remake this station into a place of possibility again.
I love watching that video because it just, it sort of makes us realize that we've got our work cut out for us, but it's such an opportunity. And what was incredible about the announcement was we actually left this train station open for a few days so that people could come through here. And we had 24,000 people come through. And we actually had to turn people away. And what was phenomenal were the stories you heard. You heard people talk about how they had sent their dad off to war and he didn't come back, or this was the place that they had entered into Detroit and started their new life. So it was really an exciting time, and I think all of the Ford folks here who welcome you today are really excited to speak with you about it. So very quickly, I don't have a lot of time, but I want to just quickly go through some thoughts about this so you get a big picture of what we're trying to accomplish here. So we not only own the train station, but we own the building next door, which you'll see as you leave, and then some other properties in the area. And the idea is to really bring jobs to this neighborhood. 2,500 Ford people will come to this area, but we'll also create jobs with other partners and with other entrepreneurs. The station, of course, will be kind of transformed to its original grandeur, but it's really more than that. What we really want to create here is this mobility ecosystem, and you mayors know better than anybody the challenges that we're facing in some of our cities. How do we have people move more freely? How do we monetize our curbs potentially in some of the cities that have more congestion? How do we think about connecting the infrastructure that's so important to ensure that the systems work together? That's what we're really looking to create here. But what's also important to us is we're moving into a neighborhood that's the oldest neighborhood in Detroit. This neighborhood just means so much to so many people. You heard Mayor Duggan talk about what it means to the Ford family. I love the fact that this is Corktown, and that's where their family originally came from. But what we hope to do is not only optimize for innovation, but we really want to ensure that we celebrate the authenticity of this neighborhood. And that's going to be difficult. We're not pretending that that's going to be an easy thing. When you bring 5,000 people into a neighborhood, there's obviously going to be challenges that we're going to have to address. But we're committed to really thinking about a lot of the policy issues that we need to address as we move forward. The idea here is to cluster the development around this area. When you first came in, you saw a park. That park is going to be reimagined by the city. They're in the process of looking at that. But the idea is to really cluster the density right here in this area and really have this be the magnet. I love this slide. Someone said it looks like all the buildings are on fire. But anyway, the idea is it's supposed to show that this is really the area where we want to cluster our early stage development. And what's really important, we're going to talk about it in a minute after I go through the buildings, is the public spaces. They're really critical to the development. The other issue is parking. How many mayors are challenged with parking in their cities? Parking is sort of turning out to be the bane of our existence here because we really want to think about parking in an innovative way. We cannot think about parking traditionally. We have to think about the future. And so when we first were talking about developing this building, we're going to have retail here. And you know retail's like parking right where the retail is. But we want to lead by example with our employees and ensure that we're testing new mobility solutions. We have autonomous vehicle shuttles, that we really think about the connected infrastructure to move people around more efficiently. So I'm going to quickly run through some construction updates, but I'm really going to talk more about site planning. So Mayor Duggan actually kind of talked about the history of this building. It's incredible that for 30 years it's really been in decay. There was no roof on this building, if you can imagine. So every day it was raining in this building. And so you can think about the thaw and the freeze that took its toll on the area. So that's why you see a lot of this sort of crumbling. Unfortunately, the security company that Mayor Duggan talked about didn't do a very good job because everything was really stolen. All the beautiful historic things that were in the building were stolen, including the beautiful copper roof that used to cover the entire station. What's fun is to look around you and say, wow, 8 acres of exterior masonry we're going to have to refurbish. I love this Gustavino tile that literally the entire roof is being held by its own weight. So there's nothing here. Don't worry, it's not going to fall on us today, but it is an impressive issue. We've got a lot of work to do around that area. But hopefully, when we finish, it'll be back to its original state and it'll be a hub of activity. You're going to walk through these areas, so I'm just showing you some quick pictures. The back is some of my favorite areas. So there's actually an area that used to have a low light, but we're going to keep it open to the, when I say open, we're going to put glass in it, but it'll be a beautiful atrium. And so that's an exciting area that we're looking to redevelop. And then what's really fun is these huge things have come down. This was a cartouche, it's called, I've learned. But this was 800 pounds, 11 feet. You can see the little guy. He's probably not so little, but he's laying next to it. All these are being remolded and will be put back up, and we're going to leave some of the original ones that are actually still in good shape. And then what is it going to be? Ultimately, our hope is that this area will just be a thriving area for community, retail, lots of opportunity to bring local entrepreneurs in, local food. We really want this to be very much a locally developed area. In addition, we'll have the Ford and Partner Workspace, and then probably hospitality at the top. We also, just quickly, I want to talk about the book depository next door. This is my favorite picture. I'm not sure why we purchased a building that had this happen to it, but this also had a few problems, as you can see throughout the years. But we're going to be renovating this as well. And what's exciting about this space is that it has huge floor plates, which gives us a real opportunity to create a fantastic entrepreneurial space with a tech lab, maker space, other innovative opportunities to bring smaller entrepreneurs in. And the idea is to co-locate some of the Ford employees, but really have a lot of other employees here too. And the idea is that there are these serendipitous collisions that occur where people really get excited about what others are doing, and it spurs their thoughts about what they're working on as well. And then the city is doing some amazing things. And I'm sure the mayor, and I hope he talks to you about this incredible riverfront park that's going down in the city, 23 acres along the riverfront. And we have this direct access to it from this station. So if you go out back here, we're going to be developing, along with the Detroit River Conservancy, a May Creek Greenway. So in less than a mile on a bike, you can be at the riverfront. And you can have access to this incredible park. So you can imagine how that is a perfect opportunity for last mile solutions. So we can start testing some really cool things in getting people around. But the bigger opportunity, and this is Bill's vision, Bill Ford's vision, is it's not just about what's happening here in Detroit, it's about how do we connect it to the region. And how do we think about creating a mobility corridor that literally goes from Campus Martius, which you'll see, I'm sure today, all the way to Ann Arbor. And already along that corridor, which is Michigan Avenue, which is the street that you just came in on, there are a lot of other things along that avenue. We have not only universities, we have the American Center for Mobility, we have Willow Run, where there's already a lot of AV testing. So you can imagine activating all these communities along this Michigan Avenue corridor and ensuring that the infrastructure there is ripe for all this innovation that we're looking to do. So this is really the exciting play. So with that, I went through that really fast. People always say I have a really, really fast speaking style, but I want to introduce Sean Thompson, who's going to come up and tell you a little bit about our community engagement, because that is really critical to the success of this project. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sean Thompson, and I'm with Ford Motor Company Fund, and I'm the Community Development Manager for this project. So, Ford Motor Company is investing over $10 million over the next 4 years within this community. And when I say community, I am speaking of not only Corktown, but North Corktown, Hubbard Richard, Mexican Town. What I've heard from the community is that this project envelopes a ton of people that really care about the community. And they asked us to refer to it as Michigan Central, because that is a label that reflects all of them. As a community engagement manager, I attend several block club meetings, business association meetings. I'm the ears and the eyes of the community. So over the next 10 years, over the next 4 years, we're going to invest $10 million. And to kick that off, we started off with our grant proposal of celebrating community and culture. We awarded $250,000 to 4 nonprofit organizations. They represent 4 different projects, from photography, apprenticeship photography classes for some of the students in the area, to dance classes, to theater. Now, if you look around, there's a ton of work that has to be done in this building and the other buildings that Mary talked about. So how are we going to do that? Well, we've launched in June this year the Detroit Trade Summer Apprentice Program. And I believe that Bob and Miguel can tell you more about this than I.
Back when we had the recession, what happened to the trades is most people became unemployed, so they left the city of Detroit. With the resurgence that we've all seen the last few years, we don't have the skilled tradespeople that we once had here 10 or 15 years ago. The shortage has become very, very noticeable, and there's a ton of work that needs to be done, both externally and internally. We came up with the idea of trying to invest in the youth of Detroit, and we had 100% backing and support from Ford Motor Company in this endeavor.
It's critically important for us to employ Detroit-based businesses and residents. And so we're starting in the high school and bringing them on site to then get them exposure to this trade. And then from there, working with the trades to get them in the apprentice program and then really grow the skills.
Just happy to be working in the city because I live here, and once we come in here, make these places all nice again, it'll help bring back the good thoughts about the city.
The apprentice program was kind of a dream, and we feel that by putting this program together and giving the youth of Detroit an opportunity to become an apprentice with RAM, that it's going to provide tremendous opportunity for the local people.
It can be replicated through electricians and plumbers, and we can go now to all the schools and start talking with advisors and principals over these next few years. That those students then have the pride that says, I worked here and I did this. This building will be here for another 100 years.
So as you can tell, it is very important to Ford Motor Company that we involve the youth of this city. I am a graduate of DPS from Osborne High School here in the city, and actually a little known fact about me is that I'm probably the only person in this room that can say that she or he has been involved in the second iconic renovation of a building. I was also involved at the fabulous Fox Theater when it reopened in 1988. So I'm very proud to be a local Detroiter involved in two projects, bringing the city back to the glory that it so deserves. And some of the events that Ford Motor Company supports is Ford Resource and Engagement Center. We've also conducted the MCS, Michigan Central Station Winter Festival, a Halloween trunk and treat. We had 30 Ford vehicles lined here that our employees and business owners decorated and filled with candy that we gave out to the youth, and everyone was invited, and we're going to be doing that again this Halloween, where we're going to close Verner Street, and the kids will be able to trunk and treat from the train station all the way to our Ford Resource Center. And then we did a Michigan Central sketch-off. I want to go back to the Ford Resource and Engagement Center. As Mary said earlier, social mobility is important to this community. We are a mobility company, but we believe in social mobility. And by that I mean, when I first joined the team back in January, I noticed that there was an elderly woman coming to our center for her groceries. What happens is they're walking to the center, and they can't bring back everything that they're entitled to. We're a mobility company. So we partnered and did a pilot program with Go Ride. So there are 3 zip code areas in the neighborhood where we are picking up people who do not have transportation, taking them to our Ford Resource and Engagement Center, and then they can bring home the more groceries, the fresh fruit and vegetables that they need for their household. Also at the center, we do free taxes. Around April, January, February, March, April, there's probably 2,000 or 3,000 people that come in to get their tax returns done free. Free legal advice, yoga classes for the senior citizens, and ballet classes for the kids, just to give you an example of what goes on at the Ford Resource and Engagement Center, and it is all free. How do we communicate to the community? We've launched our newsletter that goes out quarterly. It gives them updates. We also conduct community update meetings that we're going to do those quarterly as well. We open our Ford Information Center on Michigan Avenue in Rosa Parks. Is actually open today from 12 to 4, so I'm not sure if you'll have the opportunity to visit, but this is where the public can come and receive the latest and greatest information on construction. And finally, these are just shots of just various projects that are going on in the city, from the sketch-off to inside the Information Center and from our City One Challenge. So again, it is an honor to stand here in front of the mayor, in front of Mary, and in front of all of you as a citizen of Detroit, as a little girl who grew up here, and I'm very proud to be part of this project and be the voice of this community. And with that, I would like to introduce Cheryl, who's going to come and talk to you about the future.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Connolly. I'm the Chief Futurist for Ford Motor Company. And as everyone's talking about their ties to the community, I am reminded that my father grew up in Corktown. My mother grew up on Cass Corridor. For me, this is a really special place because when we were kids, my parents would drive the 6 kids that they had. We would go up and down the street, and they'd point out all the landmarkers, and this was always one of their favorite stops. So I'm going to shift gears, and I'm going to ask you to think about the future in a slightly different way. Despite my very exotic title, I must confess that I cannot predict the future. Nobody can. But inside a Ford Motor Company, we have to think long and hard about what the future looks like. I mean, even Henry Ford had said if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And so today, companies that want to be true innovators have to try to imagine a future that no one else has yet to imagine. And that's where a little bit of my work comes in. I can look at social, technological, economic, environmental, and political arenas to try to understand what are the forces that will shape consumer behavior. But when you do that, you have to do it in a really holistic fashion. So I'm going to ask you to walk through this bullseye with me, where we're going to talk about what's happening globally, then we'll bring it a little bit more closer to home. So first, I want you to consider for a moment the population. Demographers like to say that these numbers are our destiny. In the 1800s, 1 billion people occupied this planet. 100 years later, the number had grown to 1.5 billion. 100 years later, the population had tripled. And during that time, things like our consumption of water has more than doubled. So much so that today in the world, 1 out of 7 people don't have access to clean or quality drinking water. The problem is that we're at 7.8 billion right now. By 2025, we'll be at 8 billion. By 2040, we'll be at 9 billion. Some people say by 2050, we could be way past 9 billion. We could hit 10, maybe 11 billion. How many more people will have to go without water? We're going to have to deal with natural resource constraints that are hard to imagine at this moment in time. And what about food? We have absolutely no historical precedents to be absolutely confident that we can feed a population that exceeds 9 billion people. But I take comfort in the words of E.O. Wilson. He's a Harvard-based biologist who says we can do it. We actually can feed 2.5 billion people indefinitely on the condition that everyone becomes vegetarian. But what if not everyone agrees? What kind of political and economic strife might result as an outcome of this? Now, people don't tend to think about how the world is going to change in population numbers, least of all us as Americans, because the changes that I'm talking about are going to happen here in the West. They're not going to happen in the so-called rich world. So all of the slides you'll see today are my own illustrations, with the exception of this one and the next one. This comes from worldmapper.org, and what they did is they took their standard landmass map, and then they expand and contract each country according to where the population is going to grow or shrink. And if you can see here, it's going to look dramatically different. In fact, 50% of the world population that I just talked to, 50% of the world population growth that I just mentioned is going to happen in Africa. In other words, it's going to happen in the parts of the world that are least capable of handling it, where they have weak infrastructure, poor governance, and a widening gap between the have and have-nots. Why is this happening? It's actually happening due to something really wonderful, education. The more educated your female population, the fewer babies they have. In the 1970s, the average fertility rate was 5 babies for every woman. Raise your hand if you have 5 kids or more. No takers. No takers. Well, you are following the global average. Today, the global average is 2.4, and the United States actually is one of many wealthy countries that are below that number. What that means is that we're not having enough babies to offset the deaths, so our population is shrinking. As a byproduct of that, it means that our base population is rapidly aging. Every 7 seconds, another person turns 65 in the United States. And in the coming decades, there'll be more people over the age of 50 than under the age of 50 throughout the EU. These will create unique consequences, so many problems that the United Nations would tell you that the aging of the world's population is the greatest challenge that we will face collectively during our lifetime. Now, how many of you have ever had to take car keys away from someone you love because they've gotten too old to drive? I wish it on nobody. It is a horribly painful experience. In the real terms, you're taking away their freedom and independence, but in a more subtle way and more significant way, you're taking away their sense of dignity. Now, we know that people are going to continue to live longer. We're going to see medical advances that change the quality of life. In fact, scientists would tell you that the first person to live to be 150 has already been born. It could be someone in this room today. So imagine you approach an 83-year-old and says, it's time to give up your keys. They're going to put up a battle, but if they have a life expectancy of 85, it might not go on that long. But what if they're going to live to be 105 or 125? So we could fundamentally change the quality of life for the people that are aging, allow them to live and age gracefully in their home on their terms. Cities are going to look dramatically different. Now, this building, when it was built 105 years ago, right around the time that Henry Ford created Ford Motor Company, only 15% of the world's population actually lived in cities. Today, over half of the world's population live in city centers, and by 2030, the number will be over 60%. Cities will look dramatically different, and we see urbanization patterns changing. We'll see more and more megacities. Now, megacity is a city that has a population of 10 million people or more. The United States only has 2. We have New York and LA, but if you've ever driven in either of those cities, you know how difficult it can be to navigate a megacity. But I would turn your attention to Beijing. And Beijing actually isn't even the world's largest megacity, but they have 23 million people living in their city center. Their average daily commute is reported to be 5 hours long. And it's not just a matter of infrastructure. China actually has a highway that is 50 lanes wide, 50. And a couple years ago, that highway suffered a traffic jam that lasted 12 days long. It's almost unimaginable. Do we have anyone here from Buffalo, New York? My in-laws hail from Buffalo. And so a couple years ago during a winter storm, that a blizzard hit the city right at the height of evening rush hour traffic. And the whiteout conditions brought traffic to a halt. The snow accumulated so rapidly that it was almost impossible to advance forward. Some people ran out of gas, some people didn't have heat in their vehicles. And so they wisely abandoned their cars. But nobody told the people that were 5, 10, 15 miles behind them. So many of them waited in vain. One person did so to their own peril and perished from exposure overnight. This is what Bill Ford is talking about when he says mobility is a fundamental human right. If you disrupt the advancement of mobility, you also disrupt the advancement of freedom and innovation. So I want to kind of bring this a little bit more closer to home, to talk about what cities look like in the future. Now, cities have always been a haven for the poor. They draw people in for their economic opportunity. And so jobs are going to be increasingly important. Jobs are the single most reason why people come to work in different places. But sadly, in America today, over 50% of workers would tell you that they're dissatisfied. They're unmotivated at the workplace. And when you have unmotivated workers, you have people who cut corners. You lose productivity and efficiency. You have people who take liberties with their expense accounts. It's not good for anybody, so we have to find ways to give people meaningful and purposeful work. The people that will work on it, that young man, Miguel, someday he'll pass this train station, perhaps with his children, his grandchildren, he'll say, I helped create that. I was part of something bigger than me. Everyone worries about tech. What is tech going to do to the future of the job market? And it has there is some reason to be concerned, but it's really polarizing. You have Elon Musk who says it's the beginning of the end, and you have Mark Zuckerberg who says that it's going to untap human potential that we've never seen before. But I wonder if we just reframe the conversation around artificial intelligence ever so gently, and instead of calling it artificial intelligence, think of it as augmented intelligence. Because really the role it'll play for the workers in the future, it'll just make us better. It'll make us more efficient. We'll be able to focus our attention on higher order types of work. Another thing that a city exists for is to improve the health and well-being of its citizens. And we've heard already that food is going to be an extraordinary part of that. Would you believe it if I told you that over 50% of Americans would tell you that it is harder to eat a healthful diet than it is to do their own income taxes? And so cities must find ways to make good, high-density, quality food available to their community. We also know obesity is a global epidemic, so much so that in 2002, the World Health Organization started to call it globesity, because it is a global phenomenon, and the United States is winning that race. We are by far the most healthy in that regard, have the highest incidence of obesity rates. And there are lots of costs that come with it: heart disease, hypertension, stress, diabetes. One of the ways that we can change that from an urban planning standpoint is to think about how you create a city. Because each of us have our own unique calculation between when we decide to drive, ride, or walk. So the more walkable city, the more appealing. We already see it today in terms of real estate values. You have a high walkability index, you see higher prices being yielded for home sales. So what does this mean for you? You will have to think about how you'll navigate these challenges going forward. I can't predict the future. But if you heard something that you didn't like today, you have the ability to change that. Because if you recognize that no one has the ability to predict the future, it forces you to become much more nimble, much more streamlined. It opens your eyes to an endless range of possibilities. Really, the only way to predict the future is to create it. And the people in this room, each and every one of you, sit in a unique position that few will ever know. The access, the influence, the experience that you bring to these challenges, you can create the future. And I can't wait to see what you do with it. Thank you. I'm going to are we going to do, hold on one second. We're going to, Alexandra Ford English is going to be up in just a minute, but we're going to pause right here, just for a second.
Yeah, I know you guys have been listening to us and waiting. Are there any pressing questions or anything that you want to ask that we would take a few questions right now?
Thank you for asking this question, or giving us this opportunity. I want to go back to Sean's presentation, which I thought was enlightening, because one of the pressing questions that I have that, many of us in this room, mayors, have been focused on the G word, the gentrification issue and displacement that occurs. And as we drove to the station, I noticed, at least looking around, that this has been an area that probably will be considered your lower to moderate income community. And when you started your presentation, the first thing I thought when I heard the terms cluster, when I hear the terms, concentration of new jobs, 2,500 jobs of high skilled, high income positions, that's exactly what Richard Florida and others have said causes gentrification, displacement, because this surrounding area will be deluged with those higher paying, higher skilled individuals. So I really appreciate your point about, hey, we're moving in an engagement, we're putting $10 million over the next 4 years to engage community, job training, blah, blah, blah. Can you talk a little more about what's next once these jobs come, once this place starts popping, how you're going to protect the most vulnerable people who live in this area, who are going to see their property values take off, property taxes probably go out of hand, senior or older adults who are unable to adjust and get higher wages, and they're going to be squeezed out of this area, because all of us are being faced now with the question of, when we push these great visions, which is a wonderful vision, how do we protect those who are in these areas who are going to be disproportionately impacted by what's going to happen?
Thank you so very much for that question. And of course, from attending various block club meetings, neighborhood meetings. That is exactly what I'm faced with, that I hear from the community. And as we mentioned, Ford is investing back into the community with job training. We will be working with groups such as Focus Hope, working with our construction companies like RAM, starting that apprentice program this summer. So we are listening to the community. They do have those concerns, and we will work together along with the city, with the mayor, and we're going to look into affordable housing, helping as much as we can. And I believe that will help as long as we listen and work together.
So we have an interesting provision. As far as I know, we are the only city in America with a community benefits ordinance that requires, if there is significant public subsidy for a development, there is an entire process where the neighbors come out, develop a plan, determine whether the community benefits are enough, and only then is it recommended to City Council that approve this package. We ran a really vibrant community benefits process here, 9 people from 9 different neighborhoods, and they voted unanimously for the package that includes, we've got some affordable housing down the street. One of the things Ford's doing is paying to make that housing locked in for another 30 years. They wanted more green space protected as the development came. We locked in that green space. And it was the most interesting thing is, this is not a case where Ford is coming into the neighborhood and doing something to the community. This is something where the Community Benefits Committee laid out their plan and then is enforcing it. And right now, there is a great deal of collaboration. If you talk to the neighbors in this area right now, I would say 80 to 90% would say very positive things about the way this engagement is going. So we saw what happened in Brooklyn, we saw what happened in Washington, D.C. and other places. We have a city where most people cleared out, and now as they're coming back, we have an opportunity to do it in a way that's respectful of those who stayed, and these guys have been great partners.
Just a quick question. The office space is enormous, and back in its heyday, there couldn't have been enough train jobs for that. What was in there before the collapse that filled up that enormous office building?
So interestingly enough, the top floors were never occupied, to your point. So they had folks, working in some of the floors, but Rich, what floor did it stop at? So at 7 and up to 13, there was nothing. So they really even hadn't finished it out. Okay, does anyone else have a pressing question before we move on? We just wanted to give you all an opportunity. I see one more.
Thanks. As a futurist, I'm sure you've gotten this question, but as part of your presentation and saying that AI, augmented intelligence, is going to make life easier, that's kind of what we've heard all along the way with phones and computers and that. So what is your response to that as far as augmented intelligence?
So like many people, I don't know exactly how AI is going to work out, but I tend to be more optimistic than pessimistic. The reason I talked about augmented intelligence is that there is this interesting study where they had a radiologist compete against artificial intelligence to scan thousands of x-rays to identify it for cancer. And I think some people were surprised to see that the experienced radiologist did much better than the computer system did, because they had this experience. The computer tended to identify false positives much more frequently, and the experienced analyst saying that's a shadow, that's something we don't need to worry about, that's an anomaly. However, when you pair the knowledge of an experienced radiologist with an artificial intelligence system, the performance of that experienced radiologist even increased further. And so those are the things that give me hope when we think about how those things might change. I do worry, and this isn't a new worry. I mean, as a futurist in the late 1990s, futurists like me thought that the biggest challenge society would be facing at this time is what were we going to do with all of our leisure time? So things don't quite work out the way that we think. I mean, we should have a paperless office, and we have more paper than ever. But I do believe, and I hear your concern, is that we have to think through the negative outcomes, the possibilities, and only if we spend time thinking about how things can go wrong can we take steps to prevent that from happening before we go too long. Now with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Alexandra Ford English. She is the director of Ford's AV LLC.
Hi.
Okay.
Thanks, Cheryl. Hi, my name is Alexandra Ford English, and I'm very excited to be here today. Too excited, I really jumped the gun there.
And before I get started talking about AV deployment in our launch cities, I quickly want to ask all of you, how many of you have ever seen a self-driving car before? Well, okay, there's one out front, so hopefully a lot of you. Okay, next, how many of you have ever ridden in a self-driving car before? Okay, great. That's actually a lot of you, more than I was expecting. And for those of you who haven't had the opportunity, hopefully you'll be able to ride in a Ford self-driving car in your own city someday in the future. And that's really my goal. So I am the director of markets and operations on Ford's autonomous vehicle team. And our focus is on the successful deployment and operation of self-driving cars in our launch cities. I'm based here in Detroit. I'm actually right down the street in Corktown, but most of my team is local in each market. And if you think about, or if I categorize the main activities that our team does in the markets, it really falls into four main buckets. So the first thing we do is managing a fleet of self-driving cars. The second will be providing a great service to our customers with those self-driving cars. Third is working with our local businesses in the markets on potential partnership opportunities. And the fourth is creating strong relationships with the cities that we're in. And it's that I'd like to talk to you about today, how Ford thinks about forming those relationships with cities. So some of you may have heard that last week, a week ago on Wednesday, we announced that we will be bringing our self-driving cars to Austin. A lot went into identifying Austin as our third launch market. Ford's philosophy is not that we'll suddenly show up in the city and start putting self-driving cars on the road, and that's the end of the discussion. We believe we really need to be working with cities from the very beginning. It's important to us to make sure that the city has an interest in embracing self-driving technology. But also, we want to make sure that the city doesn't view self-driving cars as the end-all, be-all solution for all of the challenges that its city's facing. We believe that only when self-driving cars are a part of a broader transportation solution, that's the only way that we'll be successful. So I often get asked by city leaders what they can start doing now to prepare for having self-driving cars in their city in the future. So we can't be in every city in the near term as much as I would like to, but we do have ambitions to scale beyond those initial 3 markets in the future. So I always say, I could talk for a very long time about what one might do to prepare their city for self-driving cars, but I won't keep anyone here today, and I know it's quite cold. So I usually bucket into sort of the top 3 considerations that I would advise them to start thinking about now to give themselves a lot of flexibility when the time does come. So the first is it's very critical that the leaders of the city truly know what challenges their cities face. Because only if we're really honest about what those challenges are, we can start having the conversations about whether or not self-driving cars could be a potentially productive part of that broader solution. So in our initial phases, when we enter into a city, or even before we enter into that city, we have a lot of upfront conversations. Our self-driving system partner, Argo AI, and Ford Autonomous Vehicles, we work really closely with the city and state officials, and then also a variety of community partners within the market to make sure that our plans for self-driving cars really fit into the plans for the city, the challenges for the city, and what we believe will be, like I mentioned, a broader broader transportation system that includes self-driving vehicles. You would be very surprised how many times our plans change and are altered and are edited based on those types of conversations. Because we believe from a business perspective that it's only when we're solving the residents' actual pain point and their actual problem, it's only then that we're ever going to have a successful self-driving car business. The second thing we really value in a city is patience. So we're very conscientious about the many steps that it takes for us to identify a launch city all the way through to commercialization of that service. So what we think about is not just how self-driving cars can be beneficial to Ford, and we believe they will be and already are. We also want to make sure that self-driving cars can really fit in with the city. Because if there's not that symbiotic relationship, it's not going to be optimal for any of the constituents, Ford included. So what we do is, if part of the long process is first we map. We go in and we map the roads. Next, after we have a large map inventory of what's actually going on in the city, Argo AI and Ford, we test our self-driving system against that map and in the city. Simultaneously though, so that's more on the technology front, to making sure that that self-driving car is technically ready to fit in well with that city and handle all the nuances of that city. At the same time, and we do them simultaneously so that when both are ready, then we're ready to go, but we also are conducting business pilots. And what we're doing here is working on the customer experience. Is it a good experience? Do they like interacting with the vehicle? Is it safe? Is it seamless? Did we not think about something? So they're really honing in on the customer experience of what exactly we're trying to solve. We also are making sure that we're designing our business model to be profitable, but also valuable to the residents of that city. It will only be profitable if it is valuable to the residents of that city, and we know that. So we really have to have a deep, comprehensive understanding from the technical side and also the human aspect of what the citizens in the market, but then also the local businesses in the market, what they would really find useful. And that's what we do from the moment we announce we're launching in a market all the way through to commercialization of that service. And as you can imagine, that takes some time. So patience is very much appreciated. The third aspect that we consider is a welcoming environment and an openness for collaboration. So this could look like a dedicated department to really focus on this type of futuristic work. So for instance, in one of our cities, the city of Austin has a connected and autonomous vehicle task force. It doesn't have to be a dedicated department. It could simply be a willingness to engage in these kind of discussions, honest discussions usually, about what might make self-driving cars successful in your city. It's really not just about the government though, especially in our first launch markets. We really want to go into cities where the citizens are early adopters. That's important for us with new technology, that they have an innovative spirit and that they're really willing to embrace new technology and be very open-minded about that. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea about the framework we think about when we enter into a new city. It's focused very much on collaboration. We have running hypotheses, obviously, when we enter. We are open to editing them, and my job is all about editing our business model and our plans for entering into a market to really make sure it fits with the city, the local businesses, the local traffic laws, and most importantly, the residents of this city. Because if you're really not giving them a service that's compelling, they are not likely to embrace a new technology and enable self-driving cars to be part of a larger solution. So that's how we're thinking about entering into a city. And my sincerest hope is that I know there are a lot of mayors here today, and my goal is that in the near future, we will be in every single one of your markets one day, addressing your individual transportation challenges and being able to serve the businesses in your city and, most importantly, the citizens in your city. So thank you so much. I'll be around if you have questions. And next, I would like to introduce Mark De Laverne. He is the Chief of Mobility Innovation at the City of Detroit. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra. Why don't we have the panelists come up? And while they're coming up, just give you a brief background. So a few years back, the mayor brought me in from Chicago to start this new office, Mobility Innovation. Really just wasn't one in America at the time. And basically told me, think differently and get stuff done. Really emphasized the last part, though, a lot. And, you know, in the few years that we've been here, you know, we've gotten scooters. We have 3 different autonomous vehicle companies. We have car share, bike share, a really successful pilot with Lyft for first last mile. We brought mobility payment. And a few weeks ago, we were the only city in America to get a grant from USDOT around autonomous vehicles. Pretty much all of it due to the leadership and vision of the mayor. But it's also great that we have all these partners so close by that we can lean on here at Ford. So our panel here, we have Justin Reeves, who's the CEO of Journey Holdings and Translo. Alexandra, who you've already met. Jeff Jones, who's the Vice President of City Solutions at Ford Mobility. Ariel Steinhorn, who's the Head of Policy Communications at Spin. And Andy Polisanami, who is Senior Engagement Manager for Ford Smart Mobility. So Jeff, I'm gonna start with you. So we're here in Michigan Central Station. We've heard sort of how this is gonna be the future of innovation and future of mobility. So just give a little bit more on why Ford is transitioning from an auto company to a mobility company, but then also how you're beginning to engage cities in this work.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. At Ford Mobility, we believe freedom of movement drives human progress. And just as when this building was new and our founder at Ford was thinking about the transition from horses to automobiles, we're now part of this century is looking at really the transformation from automobiles to multi-modes, to shared flexible transport. As you heard from Cheryl, many of the trends that are happening with urbanization, with flexible new uses of mobility that are starting to emerge, it's really important that we embrace and provide options of choice. So in City Solutions, one of the things that we do now is look at ourselves as a transportation and mobility company, moving forward to co-create these solutions with cities like yourselves and with mayors and more importantly with communities as well, to look at opportunities to provide greater accessibility to all and to help with some of the city challenges around affordability, efficiency, accessibility, and sustainability, which includes pedestrian safety, bike safety, and air quality.
Cool. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so Alexander, you mentioned that you go in and you want to know about challenges. So what are some of those challenges that you're hearing from the city the cities that you're launching AVs? And both challenges that you're going to address AVs and then Ariel for you too as well. Some of the challenges from your non-AVs, because obviously you don't see them being the solution for everything.
Yeah, we recognize that cities have many of the same challenges, but we also believe that each city is very unique. So we want to make sure that before we enter into a city and then once we're in a city, we are very aware and clear on what the city's top concerns and priorities are. So I can give you an example from each of our 3 markets about top concerns and priorities and then how that's shaping how we're thinking about self-driving car services. So in Washington, D.C., equity and access are a top priority. So our conversations in Washington, D.C. have been focused on how self-driving cars can help provide broader access to transportation across all 8 wards. In Miami-Dade County, congestion is a significant issue. So it was recently listed as the 10th most congested city in the world and the 5th most congested city in the United States. And on average, commuters in Miami spend about 64 hours per year in their car. So our conversations with the city, and Mayor Suarez is here today from City of Miami, which is where our big command center or terminal building for our self-driving vehicles is in his city. Our conversations there have been about how we can create a self-driving car system that is extremely efficient and help reduce some of that time that people are spending in the vehicle. Austin is also concerned about congestion, but it's on a different part of the congestion life cycle. It's a little earlier than Miami is. Miami's already a big city. Austin is a rapidly growing city. So it's the fastest growing region in the United States. And the city of Austin has realized that they can't just pave their way out of a future congestion problem. Their population is expected to double by 2040, but the percentage of highways is only expected to increase by 15% in that time. So there's a big difference there. Mayor Steve Adler has said that 75% of commutes to work happen in a single occupancy vehicle. So they're already thinking about a wide range of transportation solutions to get ahead of this growing congestion problem. On my team, what we're thinking about is how we can create a self-driving service that's compelling enough to change people's behavior and start to change some of those numbers going forward and plug into that broader solution. So you could see all the cities have, sort of overlapping some of the same problems, but they do have very different priorities. And we think that what we've learned in those 3 cities will really help us going into all future markets one day.
For cities, as many of you know, regulating micromobility operators, the primary concern is how do we keep people safe who are traveling outside the confines of a vehicle. So anyone walking, scooting, cycling, even people with personal skateboards and rollerblades, how do we ensure that we're creating conditions that keep them safe? When scooters arrived on the scene in 2018, it was far from perfect, as many of you also know, but there were 80 million plus reported trips that first year. So it really showed the huge demand for this kind of transportation, that people wanted to get outside in their communities and travel in a different way. And it's presented an opportunity for operators like Spin to work with cities and think about how we build infrastructure that's conducive to different modes of transportation. So embedding in the communities, working with city transportation planners, working with nonprofits and community groups to understand, like, where is it appropriate to construct bike lanes? Where could we set up stations for electric vehicles that contribute to flow of transportation? And then, better infrastructure then addresses another challenge that cities have, which is how do you get people out of cars for really short trips? Trips that are under a mile, ideally. People are able to use public transit or cycle or use a scooter. So that's another challenge that I think as micromobility operators, we want to play a part in helping out.
So Justin, I think a lot of the folks here in the audience would tell you that public transit is really core to the success of their city, both getting people around and from an economic development standpoint. How do you see a lot of these solutions fitting, these new types of solutions that we're talking about here, fitting in with traditional public transit?
Yeah, so as a former bus driver, I love this topic. Transit systems were created decades ago, and unfortunately we're seeing that some of the systems that were put in place just don't keep up with where we are today. Riders need more mobility options. They need to do it their way, and we need to be able to meet them where they are rather than them trying to catch the bus all the time. So in the companies that I lead with Transloc, Ride Systems, and Double Map, our systems go in to help with fixed route and microtransit and on-demand solutions. And then we really empower the cities and those transit providers to meet riders where they are. And that is a key in getting them more used to the technology as well. I look at our goal, and one of our objectives is to lead the way for people to become more comfortable with technology that gets us into the autonomous vehicle future. And so I look at transit as the backbone of mobility, and mobility to be a very healthy system, ecosystem for mobility. It needs a vibrant and well-run transit system. We're looking at filling in the gaps and partnering with cities and municipalities to really find those multimodal, the suite of products that get people where they need to go. And we've been partnering in over 1,200 locations around the country in all 50 states and internationally. We're finding those gaps for first mile, last mile, trying to address and enable the cities to meet Title VI and ADA compliance. And again, our goal is really to try to show people that there are ways to get there. There are ways to become more comfortable with technology and get us there to the future. And Ford, with all they're doing, it's important to be looking at these options and getting us there to the future.
Yeah, it fits in well. I think the mayor will talk a little bit more about transit here in the city, but we've invested a lot into transit here in the city. And also now beginning to figure out like how these solutions start to work, and lots of different use cases for connecting transit, particularly first, last mile. So Andy, last question. I think everyone here will sympathize with the fact that we get deluged by people talking about data. Companies wanting to sell us data, companies wanting to give us platforms for data, telling us how much it's worth, and it's just like, yeah, I get it, but what does that mean? So if you could be succinct in talking about sort of how Ford sees data being such an important part of the future of mobility, and how you see the public and private sector working together.
Thank you, Mark. So as someone who was busy building the data platform for a year and a half, I can comfortably talk about it. A lot of you got a chance to see the data platform when you walked in. So it's sort of our take at how do we bring in data from different streams, different forms. Like, for example, there's parking data, there's public transportation data, there's data coming from our scooters, and in the future, potentially from our AVs. Once all these data sets end up in the departments of transportation in different silos, how do you unify them? How do you standardize all of this data and make sense of it? So that way, your decisions that you make in one domain, for example, if you decide to launch a scooter service, how is that complementing or cannibalizing your public transportation system? Or those interrelationships between the data sets, that's where I think we come in, where we look at data holistically, try to provide that kind of a decision-enabling system where you can look into and make a decision that is sound and data-driven, instead of just making a gut check saying how maybe this is what is going to work. So now we are here to just make sure that we pull in data from all these different streams, do all the dirty work for you, and provide your decision makers, be it a transportation planner or even the mayors like yourself, what is the best alternative for you to do this. So we not only look at the historic trends, but we use a lot of AI and machine learning techniques to project what to prepare for in the future. So our data platforms now look into like, what are the alternatives that you have? And if you do X, what would happen? So sometimes it could also be like, making changes to a particular location. For example, we can pinpoint what are the high crash potential intersections in your city. So that way you can look at what are the potential alternatives to fix that problem before it even happens. So our vehicles, the connected vehicle data that we're getting now, can pinpoint to those what you call the hotspots for accidents, because oftentimes you are visible to accidents where they happen because you have a police report. But these high crash locations oftentimes are not very visible because there's nobody reporting, hey, here's somebody that slipped on ice, or here's a heavy acceleration or deceleration. So all those information we can capture from our vehicles and bring it into our data platforms and just visualize it for you. So that way you can make better decisions as you go forward.
Cool. Thank you, Andy. I think we have about 5 minutes for questions of the panelists, if you have some. Yes.
What kind of issues will result from this major transition from the way it's done now?
So I'm sure your favorite question, when is this going to happen? When is the whole transition going to happen?
From EVs to AVs?
Yes.
Right now, we're launching our self-driving car with a hybrid. So there's a few technical constraints why we won't be launching it with a full BEV. We do hope in the future that we will launch with a full BEV self-driving car. But the reason that we can't, or we're choosing not to launch with a full BEV for our first self-driving vehicle is there's a few reasons. First is we depend on these vehicles being in use for a high percentage of the day, and if they're sitting on chargers, that really erodes into our business model. If you use a fast charger, that helps alleviate some of that pressure. But the issue is it degrades the battery, and the life cycle of the battery in the vehicle are a lot less. There's also charging infrastructure issues. So we believe that our vehicles will be all across the city throughout the day and evening, and there just simply isn't enough charging infrastructure in most cities today to be able to support that type of charging need. And the capital investment to get self-driving vehicles on the road is already so high. So we believe if we need to, we'll tackle the charging system infrastructure as a subsequent step. Additionally, there's a technological constraint for having the initial autonomous vehicles be a full battery electric vehicle. And studies have shown that the compute power from the self-driving system, so essentially layman's terms, the brains on the vehicle, is so high. And if you also think about how we're operating right now in many southern cities, intentionally, we want to be in optimal weather at the beginning because there are some weather constraints with our sensor suite. We believe our riders, for comfort, will be blasting the air conditioning, and that also has a huge battery drain as well. So our studies have shown that up to 15% of the range of the BEV will be taken out from the self-driving system and the air conditioner and other technological demands on the vehicle. So they are two separate technology advances, and we are treating them as such within the company. However, it is our goal and our hope, and we believe that over time, in the not too distant future, they will converge into one vehicle.
Let me just add to that. So the disruption that's happening right now, connectivity is already here. Electrification is here and coming. Shared mobility is already here, and that's why we're very much embracing it. And autonomy, as Alexander just spoke about, it's all happening simultaneously and at different levels, and they're all interconnected. One of the things that's really interesting is that, and the reason why we're so excited to talk to you, is that the infrastructure is also changing. So smart city infrastructure also needs to change to offload some of these capabilities, whether it's the fast charging that she spoke of, or maybe some of the intelligence in the intersection into cities. So it's really critical that that also grows at the same time so we can have a more smooth experience and adoption. And at Ford Mobility, we're here to actually co-create with cities to help with that transformation as soon as possible. It is going to take some time, but it's all happening now simultaneously very quickly. Our approach, though, has been to work with you to ensure our products and services actually help the community versus just force new challenges on the community, such as, as ride-hailing has done with congestion in many cities.
So time for one more question, or two.
Aside from the challenges of having heavy congestion, another big challenge that communities face is, for example, for low-income residents in their communities to be able to get back and forth to work. As you are delving into AVs, what are some pilots that you're doing in communities to try to help find sustainable solutions for individuals to be able to get to workplaces?
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's something that we're thinking about a lot. So our hope is that we are able to develop a self-driving service that is affordable and really accessible. That's our intent. We believe the vehicles in the fleet will serve a variety of different businesses and services, but we want to make sure that at the root of it, it is not increasing the socioeconomic divides in the city, and that we believe that we can do it through multiple different ways. One is making sure geographically it's serving the populations it needs to serve. So we operate so level 4 autonomous vehicle technology is self-driving, but within what we call a geofence. So it's a predefined area within the city that we set. We're constantly evolving and editing our geofences based on demand, the city needs, the priorities of the city. So we will definitely take a close look at that. We also can't go into specific numbers, but looking very closely at our business model to make sure that our services do offer a range and definitely affordable options to make sure we're not excluding the people who don't need to be excluded.
Speak quick, though.
So one thing on that is that we have things we can do now that prepare us and get us further down that path to this autonomous future. Fixed route optimization is one where we collect so much data that help enable us to get more efficient with our systems, but also microtrans and on-demand services. Those are things that can be done right now that don't require massive amounts of infrastructure investment, and we can move forward with those as we learn and get a lot of information from that as we get towards this future that we see.
So one more question, because we want to get you to be able to see some of this building. So, yep.
Yeah, Deirdre Waterman, I'm Mayor of Pontiac, right up the road here. Where else globally is there the advance in autonomous vehicles going on? And is there any technology that's being developed globally that you're dependent upon in terms of your further development?
That's a great question. Autonomous technology is being developed globally. So there are certainly pockets throughout the world. There is a large concentration of it here in the United States. You can imagine Silicon Valley and here in the Detroit area. There's also technology happening in China, but that has its own constraints, and likely there won't be a flow of the technology back and forth. Again, like Cheryl, I can't predict the future, but that would be my personal guess. If you're actually asking about our supply chain dependencies, we feel very confidently that the majority of our dependencies are within our control and happening locally. And we, though, believe there are opportunities, most notably in Europe and some other parts of the world, for us to bring our technology. So we announced a partnership with our Argo, which is our self-driving system partner. VW recently invested in them as well, and the intent there is for Argo's self-driving technology, which we're utilizing here in North America. VW will likely bring that to America, or sorry, to Europe. We're doing America.
Cool. So please join me in giving our panelists a big round of applause. They'll be here if you have any additional questions. Now I'm handing it off to Mayor Barnett.
Thank you so much. That was a great peek into what's going to happen here. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you for hosting us here. I think the mayors want to sit here for another 2 hours. You're not used to this Michigan chill. It's no big deal for us. But we want to thank them, thank our sponsors. Certainly one more round of applause for Ford, please. Thank you for the time you've given us. We also want to thank our other sponsors throughout the course of the day: NBC, Comcast, Universal, Rocket Mortgage, DTE Energy, SciWac, Construction, the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, the Mike Ilitch School of Business, General Motors, and where we are headed next, which is the DIA.